Dr. Kelly Brogan, thank you for having us today in your home. We are really excited to sit down and talk to you. And I don't want to waste a minute because I want to dive into this book, this awesome book, A Mind of Your Own, The Truth About Depression and How Women Can Heal Their Bodies to Reclaim Their Lives. So this is literally hot off the publishing presses.
Yes.
Released just a little over a week ago.
Yes.
And it's caused quite a stir. Perhaps not
my specialty. Yeah.
Perhaps not in the way that you had envisioned. And you make some pretty bold statements in this book. And I kind of want to just deep dive into that, specifically about depression, about antidepressants, about big pharma companies, and about the present medical system and the corruption of modern psychiatry. Mm-hmm. And I quote, you say that depression is merely a symptom, a sign that something is off balance or ill in the body that needs to be remedied. And go on to say, I'm convinced that the pharmaceutical industry and its bedfellows have created an illusion of science where none exists, in the service of profit over professional responsibility. And I want you to know that I couldn't...
Who said that?
I know. Did I say that? I couldn't put this book down. This is really, I said to you when I first came in here, this is like a sassy medical text. While the conversation of supporting our body's innate wisdom may sound woo-woo to some, and conspiracy theorists to others, you know, I think this is a really good time for me to introduce the fact that you have one of the most impressive resumes of credentials, and you provide the science to back this up, okay, and to substantiate these claims. You have studied cognitive neuroscience at MIT before graduating from Cornell University Medical College and completed your psychiatric training and fellowship at NYU Medical Center. You are board certified in psychiatry, psychosomatic medicine, and integrative holistic medicine. Damn, girl.
It's an expensive trajectory.
But you are one of the only doctors in the nation with these qualifications.
Unfortunately, yes.
Well, I think it's magnificent because, again, I'm going to just go back to, I started with the claims, and then I'm backing it up because everybody wants to know about the science and how do you prove it.
Yeah.
And girl, you got the science and you got the education and people are listening. So first of all, I want to start off by saying thank you for writing the book. I want to thank your publisher for publishing the book.
Yes.
And now I want to move into thanking your grassroots movement. Well, first of all, I want to talk about how the day after your book published, it sold out on Amazon. And now we are, I think, 9 days in, and we just got information that you will be number 10 on the New York Times best-selling list next week.
Yes.
I think, amen, we're done here.
It's shocking. No, it's amazing, and it really is a testament to, you know, not only the readiness, I think, for this information, but also the power of communication and communities and even the internet. You know, the information, if you want it, if you feel you need it, is out there. And we don't need to be filtered and spoon-fed our information about our health from corporations with, you know, profit-bearing interests.
Let's go back to the fact that you have this incredible book in you and you get it out and you get it to a fabulous publisher and they publish it immediately. There's going to be fanfare and coverage, and what happens?
Right.
Tell us what happens.
Right. So I anticipated this because I've been involved in the activism world for a number of years, and I understand the concept of enmeshment, particularly around the fiduciary responsibilities that some corporations have to their shareholders, and the fact that, you know, there is sponsorship for almost all of the mainstream media outlets by the pharmaceutical industry. So I told Harper, I said, you know, don't expect to see me on the Today Show in 2020 and 60 Minutes.
Right, so I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second because this is HarperCollins.
Yes.
And this book, this information, HarperCollins, this gorgeous woman, all your credentials, one would have expected media fanfare. One would have expected you to be on mainstream media.
Right. And
it was like
crickets.
Crickets.
Not only crickets, we actually got no's, and actually a very aggressive no from a mainstream outlet that said, we're going to do you the favor of telling you that if we were to cover this book, it would be negative press for you. So I appreciated that. I really didn't sweat it. Harper had never had this experience before, so I think that they were a bit put off by it. Everything happens the way it's supposed to happen, right? So it really presented to me a beautiful opportunity to call on the people who resonate with this message, to call on my colleagues who also are working in the same arena. We're all trying to create a space for people to engage this kind of approach, to begin to write collectively a different story about our health in this country. And so it was an incredible uprising of positive energy, and we
9 days.
Yeah,
9 days. I mean, that's quite remarkable.
Well, within the first, I think, 30 hours, it hit the top 20 books out of 8.8 million on Amazon. Right. I mean, it has no business being there, considering that there wasn't a single mention on mainstream media. So it's
it has every business being there. It just isn't following a conventional trajectory.
Path, which
right?
is fitting, right?
So, was there a moment for you where you may have been freaked out by this, or may have been dismayed by the fact that you were getting all these no's?
So I've had quite a journey, and in the past year, I've really undergone what can only be really described as a personal transformation, because I've really spent a lot of my life in what I describe as a masculine energy, right? So very ambitious, very productivity oriented, very focused on controlling the narrative and architecting my success and my influence. And I had I experienced the death of a mentor, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, in July of last year, and it really, was one of those opportunities, which we can discuss, is really something I think depression also presents. It was an opportunity for me to begin to practice the art of surrender, right? So I really don't get stressed out anymore. Nothing really tweaks me anymore, because I think I've just come to a place where I understand that it's, I call it the maybe principle, right?
Or isn't that interesting?
Exactly, it's
isn't
a curiosity.
That interesting? Right.
Exactly. So even when things appear to be, sort of the height of adversity, there's something in it you needed, and this couldn't have been a better example.
Absolutely. When did you feel compelled and called to get this message out and to really speak out about depression, your findings with depression, and then obviously how that worked into antidepressants and drugs, and then that whole slippery slope?
Right. So I was raised in a very conventional family. We're not New Agers, not hippies, and I very much believe that perfect health was just a prescription away, right? And this was absolutely my orientation. I was very interested in mastering pharmacology, and as a psychiatrist in training, that was really my focus, was on being the best prescriber I could possibly be. And so I did a fellowship in what was then a burgeoning field called reproductive psychiatry. Right. And essentially what that boils down to is that you specialize in prescribing medication to women who are considering pregnancy, pregnant or postpartum. And I was pregnant during my fellowship, and I remember having this feeling when I was writing a prescription for another pregnant patient and thinking, I would never want to take one of these medications, as a pregnant woman. Yeah, it was a weird dissonance, right? Because I spoke to her about the available literature, but something just seemed intuitively like I was missing a part of the story.
The available literature.
Exactly.
That nobody reads. They pull it out, they throw it in the garbage.
Right.
It's like listening to the commercials on TV.
Exactly.
Mumbling in the background.
Exactly.
I don't sign on the dotted line.
Exactly.
Right.
So it really wasn't until about 9 months postpartum that I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called Hashimotos, and I had that same intuitive hit, where I was sort of felt like, I don't want to take a synthetic hormone prescription for the rest of my life. I'd never had a health problem before. Right. And so I had the sense to consult a naturopath, and she walked me through dietary change, beginning to consider things that I'd never made time for, even really cared about: exercise, meditation, looking at, strategic supplements. And within 6 months, my antibodies went from the high 2000s to normal, and I was off of natural hormone within a couple months after that. Beyond being exciting, it actually, sort of inspired rage in me, because I felt like, hold on a minute, I've just invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, blood, sweat, and tears into a training and education that taught me that this was not possible. So now not only have I seen it's possible, but I've actually experienced it's possible. And it's my belief that experiential knowing is the most powerful wisdom kind of life experience to offer you a new perspective. Because you can read all the science you want all day long, and you can talk to as many people as you want, but until you really feel what's possible in terms of your own capacity for healing, I don't think that this entire worldview is really totally available to you. So that's when I knew I was onto something that I needed to unpack. And it sent me back into the literature. I've always been a data nut. You can ask any of my colleagues. I've always been the one reading more.
You're the one that's actually
papers.
reading all of that.
Yeah, for whatever reason, it's always
Right.
interested me. I find, it's like every Saturday morning for 11 years, I've been waking up to NCBIs. They're called they're abstracts from PubMed.gov, and it's like going fishing. I sort of see what's out there and what researchers are up to and what kinds of questions they're asking, and you can really watch the trends. It's pretty interesting of something, in the field I'm interested in now is referred to as psychoneuroimmunology. It's a mouthful.
And I had to break that down.
I know,
I was like,
but it's sort of like it has its parts. It makes sense. And when I first developed an interest in it, there was maybe a paper every 2 or 3 months, and now there's multiple every day. So, I went back to the literature and I began to unpack, what it was that I had learned. And that was Pandora's box I've never been able to close. And
Right.
I began to look into everything. What about things I had taken, birth control, Tylenol, Advil, what about acid blockers or statins, or, what's the fuller story? And I began to read books on pioneering intellectuals and researchers and doctors who had been asking the same questions. And that's where I was exposed to science that in all of my training I had never seen. And my practice evolved. So I began to apply what I was learning to my practice. I began taking patients off of medications. I began working with lifestyle interventions, the same ones that had healed me, and applying it to psychiatric pathology. And I stopped prescribing. So this was a couple of years ago.
You made a statement in the book that in hindsight, you realized that you've never healed anyone through a prescription.
Never. It's management. Yeah, it's crisis
When you
management.
think about that, it's just,
Yeah.
that's just daunting.
Right.
Right?
Oh, my absolute goal at this point is to get patients out of my practice, right?
Right.
I would consider it a failure to have a lifelong patient.
Right.
So the idea is for me to transfer agency back to them, essentially inspire them with the fact that they have the tools that they need to go on making, wise decisions for the rest of their lives. So it's a very, very different model. This approach is obviously in enough demand that at a certain point I had a 1.5-year wait list in my practice in Manhattan, and there's no possible way for me to address how grossly limited the current model is
Right.
in its outcomes, and how many patients feel disenfranchised, and how many people are maybe even just curious about another
Right.
approach. So that's where, of course, it makes sense to create an affordable self-help option, and that's exactly what this book was intended to be, to bring this information to a broader audience.
Well, this book is like a Pandora's box for me. That's the way I feel about
Yeah.
it when I was reading it. And I think the first Pandora's box was when I read Goddesses Never Age
Yes.
by Dr.
Yes.
Kristen Northrup. And that really set me off on this path of realizing that our bodies have this innate ability to heal themselves, which was really a concept I never really thought about.
No.
And then further, when you start delving into the depression, you said psychiatry, unlike other fields of medicine, is based on a highly subjective diagnostic system based upon your doctor's opinion of the symptoms you describe. There are no tests. You can't pee in a cup or give a drop of blood to be analyzed for a substance that definitely indicates that you are in depression or
Right,
experiencing
right.
depression. And also that made me realize that, you gave staggering statistics about how many people are on antidepressants.
It's become the panacea, right?
Yeah.
I have no intention of maligning doctors. They are, by and large, very good people called to this field for the right reasons. And they're doing the best that they can with what we're taught, essentially, right? So if you're a family practice doctor, because 75% of antidepressant prescriptions are written not by psychiatrists, actually,
Right.
but by internists and family practice doctors. And, if you are presenting to your doctor for a 10-minute appointment and you're telling them you have brain fog, you feel tired, you can't motivate yourself, your mood is flat, you've gained 14 pounds in the past, 2 months, your hair is falling out, and you have bloating and gas. This is a level of complexity, we call it like syndromal presentations, that is so common today, for reasons we can talk about. But these are the modern ills, right? And they're far too complex to be able to piece them together diagnostically in the space of 10 minutes.
Right.
And plus, we're not really given the diagnostic tools and education to understand the newer model of chronic illness. Because, I talk about how there are statistics that suggest that it takes 17 years for modern science to trickle into the doctor's office. So we're really at the
So wait, let's just go back to that for a second. That was staggering. Okay.
Yeah.
So it means that, for example, bad results come back on a test study, but it takes 17 years for that to actually make it to
it's a slow moving,
to mainstream market.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so what happens then is that there's this disconnect between what we know about what people are struggling with today and scientifically and what doctors are able to offer their patients in terms of diagnostics and interventions. So your doctor's just ill-equipped, and unless they take matters into their own hands to educate themselves from the primary literature, then they're going to only be able to work with what they learned in medical school, which is an outdated model. So, we learned that you meet a patient's distress, especially when there's not an obvious diagnosis, with an antidepressant. It's really the best that they can offer in the given circumstances. Mm-hmm. So in this way, psychiatry becomes really the wastebasket for the limitations of the conventional model. But it's my assertion, that what we are calling depression, and by the way, the book is primarily focused, I guess, on depression and anxiety, but I write about, and it also applies to every single mental illness. There's no carve out. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, panic attacks, OCD, you name it. The conversation is the same, which is that what we have been really trained, and largely by media and the vested interests of pharmaceutical industry, we have been trained to think of these as discrete disease entities, right? Probably something you were born with, even if we haven't been able to figure out the genetics of it, probably something you were born with, and you're going to have to manage pharmaceutically for the rest of your life. Just the way a diabetic has to take insulin, you have to take your mood stabilizer or your antidepressant. And what we're discovering is we're using these impressionistic labels to assign to patients, and it's absolutely falling short. So we're not getting them better. They're continuing to struggle, and many times they're actually doing worse.
Compounding.
Yeah.
And resulting in other chronic illnesses. In terms of the system, you said Western medical illusion, it sets up a vicious system that ushers you into a lifelong customer status, dependent and disempowered. And based on data from the British Medical Journal, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and the Centers for Disease Control, it has found that prescription drugs are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer.
Yeah.
It's
It's
like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, so prescriptions beget themselves, right? So, when you take a prescription, for example, let's look at an acid blocking medication, right? So let's say you're offered Prilosec or Pepcid because you're eating something that you probably shouldn't be eating, right? But instead of somebody identifying the root cause of the issue, you're given one of these medications to suppress the symptoms of poor digestion. So unfortunately, one of the documented problems with this intervention is that you can develop specific micronutrient deficiencies like B12 deficiency, right? Well, it also happens to be documented that B12 deficiency has been and can be at the root of not only depression, but actually psychotic depression. Patients who hear voices and experience paranoia, and it's completely reversible not only through B12 replacement, but could have been avoided altogether by dietary adjustment. And these patients, of course, end up on not only antidepressants, but often augmentation strategies, including antipsychotics. So you can see the domino effect. And, what really fires me up is that I just believe that everybody deserves the fullest picture of information before they make a healthcare decision. That's it. And then everyone should feel free to do what feels right for them, right? Whether that's prescription drugs or otherwise, they should be able to pursue that. But only in the fullness of what we call informed consent.
Right. You know, there's this synapse. Now we're going to go back to, well, you talk a lot about patients that will come to you, for example, they're already on antidepressants, and then they'll say, I have this, and I have this side effect, and I have this, and I'm depressed, and I'm on antidepressant, and I can't sleep, and a slew of other things. So what was really exciting in the book, I mean, obviously I want to speak specifically to depression and then to drugs and antidepressants, but you have a protocol that patients come to you and you really just want to, like you say, unpack it. Mm-hmm. And you want to peel back the layers and you want to help them shift into a new conversation where and I love this term you use, lifestyle medicine, where you're connecting you as a whole. You're looking at your life as a whole.
Yes.
You know, what your intake is, you know, from your food, your nutrition, what you're putting on your body, what products you're using, what chemicals you're exposed to. And can you speak to us more about that?
Absolutely. So the most important foundational principle is the mindset, right? So the mindset that I grew up in and that absolutely was foundational to my conventional training is this. The body is fundamentally flawed, right? It's like a minefield of dangerousness just waiting to explode. And we need to manage it. We need to really dominate it, and we need to commandeer it in such a way that it knows who's boss, right? So if it goes and gets diarrhea, we're gonna get rid of that. If it goes and gets, hair loss, we're gonna it's a constant battle. Right. It's really a warring posture, right? And so in that model, intervening with chemicals that are, offered to us as the product of, science, right? The product of laborious efforts on the part of these intellectuals and researchers and scientists, it makes sense. But there's a very different mindset.
It's Band-Aids.
It's Band-Aids, right? And it can be Band-Aids on a festering wound if you really look at it that way. Yeah, big Band-Aids. And sometimes the analogy that's used in functional medicine is, that it's sort of like taking a Tylenol for a shard of glass in your foot. There actually is a way to take it out. Wouldn't you prefer to do that? Right. So the alternative mindset is one in which we sort of sit back, for a moment and take a look at the many, elements of progress that have come from technology and scientific exploration. And we begin to understand that there actually have been a lot of costs and that we've sort of traveled too far down a path that is beginning to have diminishing returns, right? And so this mindset actually has compelled us to appreciate our connection to the environment and our connection to nature. And part of the most poetic element of this and what science is now, bringing to our awareness is that what we always thought was out there in terms of bugs and germs and, nature over there, we've now understood is our inner ecology.
Microbiome.
Exactly. It's like the most poetic thing ever, right? No longer can we just war against the enemies, right? The enemies are inside. And not only that, but they are very much controlling every aspect of our health and wellness. So this model is really only the appropriate perspective, in my opinion, since the completion of the Human Genome Project about 10 years ago, when we discovered that in fact our protein coding genes don't explain why we are even more complicated than a grain of rice, let alone each individual human's experience. So that gave rise to epigenetics, right? To this idea that in fact, what we've been told doesn't matter. What I was told in my training doesn't matter. What you eat, what you think, what you breathe.
Can you get a refund from these schools?
Right? Seriously.
I need a little tuition refund.
Seriously. It's amazing. We were taught that everything is genetic because what is the implication there? The embedded implication is that nothing that you do matters.
Right.
You need the system to fix your unfortunate genetics.
I need a couple prescriptions,
yes,
right?
To get you back on track.
So I love with epigenetics that it's like, it's not your genes, your history, your family, genetics. It's not a foregone conclusion that if my dad has this, that it's going to express this way for me. That's what's exciting about epigenetics.
Yes. It should, yes. It gives you the path you were looking for, right? Yeah, and I don't believe there's even a carve out. So, even, when we talk about breast cancer genes and when we talk about other things that people feel are their destiny, encoded in their DNA, it's absolutely not the case.
Well, look what's happening in that sector. I mean, they're doing mastectomies
Exactly.
and, hysterectomies and
it's based
prophylactically.
Yes, it's based on the presumption that we have unlocked the truth about the gene to illness linear relationship.
Right.
And it's anything but. In fact, what we're finding is that all of these environmental exposures speak to our genes. Every single bite of food that you eat speaks to your genes, and it's called nutrigenomics. It's an entire discipline, but again, it takes so much time for this to trickle into conventional consciousness. And we've made a lot of mistakes, particularly psychiatry. I mean, it was 1949, I think, the Nobel Prize was awarded for therapeutic lobotomy. There have been many, many times where we've sort of been like, hey,
did we do
oops,
that?
did we do that?
Sorry.
Exactly. Recommending smoking.
Let's rip that chapter. Oh yeah, exactly.
So it's okay. That's part of the nature of science. It's okay to sort of, get to a point where we realize it's time to recalibrate, and I believe we're there.
So another quote from the book: "One size fits all medicine is no longer appropriate. We just don't know how to determine who might be at risk for adverse effects ranging from psychiatric conditions to death."
So here's the thing, and this is really what in many ways made me put down my prescription pad, because we are learning so much about biochemical individuality, right? Which is this idea that you can be born or manifest through, environmental exposures, variants in the way you metabolize drugs, variants in your vulnerability in terms of hormones or your immune system or even your gut function. And we just don't have the tools yet to determine who would respond how to a given pharmaceutical chemical. So,
especially if they're taking something else.
Particularly, yeah.
Right.
Or have underlying undiagnosed illnesses.
Right.
So the most harrowing manifestation of this in psychiatry, really isn't making the news media yet. And it's around impulsive violence, including homicide. And it's actually been well documented in the literature that patients who have a particular genetic variant in their liver enzyme, that metabolizes these medications, if they have this variant, within doses, sometimes even one, of a psychiatric medication, it's primarily antidepressants. These patients have been documented literally to have murdered their children, murdered their spouses, gruesome stuff. So,
and all the violent crimes. A lot of these.
I know. And that's what I've, sort of was uncovered to me. And initially I was like, oh, come on, that's so sensational. How do you know these patients are mentally ill? So obviously, they're on medication. That's just
but that's
coincidence.
What about, and even as a patient, if you're depressed, just take it back if it's not violent, but you're depressed, you start on the medicine, you're further depressed, you just think it's not that, you don't think it's the medicine, you think it's just
the
me.
illness.
I'm just depressed.
Right.
The most exciting thing here is the connections that you've made in the book. The gut connection, the food that we intake, how that's expressing itself within us, and how we can reset our microbiome.
Yes.
That's the exciting conversation.
Totally. So we've been told a story about depression as a chemical imbalance, right? And we've been told that you're probably born with it, as I said, and you probably have some maybe serotonin deficiency going on up there, and you need a chemical. And in fact, in the many, many decades that there have been efforts to look at, the brains of suicide victims, like you said, urine, blood, we just haven't been able to confirm that there is any validity to that.
Right.
So the literature itself has moved in a different direction over the past about 20 years, right? So remember that 17-year gap I said, we're just beginning to hear about it in the collective consciousness, right? And it's called the cytokine theory of depression. And essentially what that means is that it's bringing depression, and by the way, other mental illnesses, into the arena of lifestyle diseases, right? So like cancer, like autoimmunity, like heart disease, like diabetes, where because of what is called evolutionary mismatch, right? Like we've been evolving for 2.5 million years to expect a certain set of exposures. And now we are living over the past 100 years in a totally different lifestyle than we've ever seen before in literally the history of humanity. So our bodies are responding and trying to adapt. And that's actually what inflammation is. It's not a bad thing.
We have to talk about inflammation.
It's part of the gut picture. So in the literature, it's the entry point. So if depression is an inflammatory disease, meaning that the symptoms of, social withdrawal, fatigue, avoidance of food, avoidance of sexual, interactions, these sorts of things that are meant to sort of sequester you off so you can recover. If those are all for a reason, so what happens when the body actually feels under siege chronically, then we actually, have these years and years and years of struggle that we never had previously. So when we look at what do we do about inflammation, according again to the science in this arena, the relevance of that ecology in our gut is foregrounded, because we understand that one of the major drivers of inflammation is dietary exposure.
So let's just go back and just describe what inflammation is.
Yes. So essentially it's a messenger system in the body, and it's the alarm bell, right? So it can be triggered by many different things, by psychosocial stress, like perceived stress, by chemical exposures that you are particularly poorly adapted, I would say, to deal with. And chemical exposures include the 100,000 some unstudied chemicals in our environment, including, pesticides and plastics and industrial chemicals. It's a long list.
It's all in the book.
And it can also include dietary exposures, particularly processed foods that are not recognizable to our immune systems and to our guts. And it can also include infections and latent infections that, because of immune system dysregulation, we now sort of harbor. Things like Epstein-Barr, for example, Lyme disease.
But there is inflammation is good in the healing process, correct?
It's totally necessary.
So,
the body doesn't make mistakes.
Right.
So
I just want to make sure there's a distinction.
Yes.
There's good inflammation, which is when your body, like the troops come in and they're trying to heal something.
Yes.
For example, a wound, a cut, something. Okay. But then this other
chronic
inflammation that gets set off, gets triggered by something, a chemical imbalance or whatever. If there's nothing to heal, it can actually go after healthy cells. Right?
Yes, and it's in the persistence of it, right? So stress and inflammation ancestrally were always like an on-off phenomenon, like meet the demand and then recover. Right? And so now we have only on.
Right.
And this is part of the problem. And this is why, it's becoming maladaptive, okay? I have no doubt that given more time, we would actually probably equilibrate and actually probably adapt to this very sick planet we're living on. I actually think the body has infinite resources, but we're just in this awkward transition, right? Where we're actually struggling because of the symptoms of chronic inflammation. And the reason you get depression and you get cancer is not something we have a good understanding of.
It's just the way it manifests also.
Just the way it manifests.
But that's the interesting part of this conversation, is that when did we lose touch with wanting to live a vibrant life? Mm-hmm. When did we get into this rat race where we forgot that it's our God-given nature to live peacefully, not to be in that constant pressure cooker stress, to ingest healthy food, to feel that? I mean, I think there's a big disconnect. People forget.
Totally.
What are you eating? Why are you doing this? What could you do differently? And that you can actually press that reset button.
Yes. I love this question and comment, because many patients that I see are still in the symptom suppression mindset, right? So that's the American way. It's get rid of your symptoms. Your body's annoying. It's getting in your way. Get back to work.
Let's get a quick fix.
Yeah, quick fix. Get back to work.
I don't have time for this.
Exactly. And so you end up just waking up, going to work, coming home until you die. I mean, is that really what you're here for? Probably not.
Eating some processed food, drinking some wine, and going to bed.
Numbing the pain, right?
Self-medicating.
Yes.
On top of your prescriptions.
On some level, exactly. On some level, I think we intuit that there's more possible, right? And so my sort of hidden agenda with my patients, and of course, with my broader message, is let's alleviate your symptoms. That's actually pretty easy to do. But then let's actually see if we can shift your mindset so that you can shed some of your fear, so that you can actually feel into what the hell you're here to do.
Even if it's one thing.
Yes.
Like one little step. I always say take one step, carve out. People always say, I don't have time, I can't afford, excuse. But one little thing, 5 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes of shifting your diet, to something, I think I'm like your perfect patient. Like in my 20s, at the height of my modeling career, I was depressed.
Yes.
And I just thought I was just because I was in my 20s and dramatic and which I probably was, but I was eating a bagel and a double cappuccino every morning.
Over.
Yeah, for breakfast, and it was on birth control.
Yes.
So I
Yes,
read
that's a
these,
big
and
one.
these are like red flag, red flag,
Yes.
red flag. I was like, but again, I wasn't thinking, oh, maybe this diet is, obviously that's oversimplifying things, but that this diet is contributing, or these chemicals that I'm just taking because my doctor says to.
It's not oversimplifying it though. And in fact, there are now randomized trials looking at how gluten can actually cause depression. Literally, it can be that simple. But what's so interesting, right, is that you begin to think, oh, it's me.
Right.
Like it's either my
Immediately,
personality
right.
or it's maybe I'm sick and mentally ill in some way. No.
Everybody's on birth control. So you're just thinking that, I would never think it was the birth control and the bagels and the cappuccinos that I was having every morning.
Exactly.
That was my get up and go.
Exactly.
Breakfast of champions. And so, so that also, so going into the microbiome and the gut connection and the food, walk us through what you do with your patients.
Yes. So what I've learned is that the single most powerful intervention available to us, because I struggle with impatience. I'm somebody who likes
one sister to another.
It's something I'm working on. So I like to see results quickly. And listen, I know my patients do also. And
you're passionate and excited about this message.
And I know that it's possible. So the real needle mover in my experience for most people is taking dietary change as a medical prescription. And the reason that I think it's powerful, at least one of them, is not only because food has information in it, like I said, that speaks to our genes, but also because we know within days we can shift our microbiome. So we can literally change
remarkable.
that within days, yeah. So you trash your body for 30 or 40 years,
right.
and in a couple days, you get a pass. How amazing is it? It's like a gift.
So let's just go back one more. I just want to make sure. I know that the microbiome is a much more accepted conversation now. People have heard about it, but I just want to make sure everybody knows what the microbiome is.
Yes. So when we figured out that we don't have enough what are called protein coding genes to explain how we're human and why we get sick the way we do, we had to sort of figure out, well, where was this genetic information and the complexity coming from? And that's when we learned that we have, we are teeming with bacteria, virus, fungus, and even other things, archaea, all of these microorganisms.
We'll take care of your bugs and they'll take care of you.
That's
Did you
right.
say that?
And we have, exactly, and
right.
we have to work with them, right? So when we look at antibiotics, when we look at sanitizers, when we look at vaccines, when we look at all these ideas of us versus the germs, we're beginning to learn that that's how we're actually making ourselves sicker. We need to cooperate with these organisms that are in and around us, literally, if we are going to actually achieve any measure of health. And so actually there's even, research on what are called psychobiotics now, which are probiotics, which are intended to have psychiatric effects. And there's randomized trials looking at probiotics for anxiety. 30 days later, patients who would otherwise have been on Zoloft for life, are feeling
So again,
better.
that's connecting the gut-brain biology.
Yes. Well, everyone intuits, I think, right, that the brain speaks to the gut, right? We've all been nervous and, felt butterflies or even had diarrhea or something like that, gut feeling. We have this direction makes sense to us.
Right.
But what we're learning from the published literature is about this direction, about what's going on in the gut. So what you're eating, how it's being digested, what is the inflammatory quotient in that space. That is communicating, we think mostly through a nerve called the vagus nerve, to your brain and setting off that message in your brain, which is literally accounting for all manner of what we are calling psychiatric pathology. So that's why diet becomes a massive tool. So when I meet with patients, I foreground the dietary intervention. And actually, you don't even get a second appointment if you haven't given it a go.
She's tough. True. She's a tough cookie. No, but I listen, you're walking the walk and talking the talk because you know it works and you won't.
And because it worked for me, so I know firsthand.
Well, you're not going to compromise that. So the thing I also love in the book is that not only are you finger pointing and calling all of this stuff out, but you're handing out sustainable, tactical solutions. There's a 30-day action plan in here with, there's the detox, I guess, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the dietary piece is sort of a no compromise enterprise. So listen, if you're not ready today,
enterprise. That's good.
Like a infomercial. If you're not ready today though, then wait till you're ready. You have the menu, you have the tools. When you are ready, it's a month of your life.
So tell them,
give it a go.
We get rid of gluten.
And it's not that bad. Yes. So first I like to focus on what you are eating. So what you are eating,
healthy, vibrant, live.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So of course there's a focus on sourcing, right? So looking at pastured animal products, organic produce. The foods that we're focusing on are very high in nutrient density and very low in potential to provoke your immune and inflammatory systems. Those are the tenets. They also are an instrumental in their natural fat content in balancing blood sugar. This is a major issue for the patients that I see, and certainly was for me too. So these are, if you're somebody who literally can't go more than 2 hours without needing a snack, who gets like irritable, maybe even jittery, nauseous, headachy, brain foggy when you haven't eaten frequently enough, who craves sugar, who has you're on the carb train, you can be liberated from this literally within the space of a week and a half. So what you are eating this is a red meat inclusive diet.
Yeah, that was surprising to me.
Yes, I know, it's surprising. I was an ethical vegetarian for years before I ever, moved into this dietary arena. And so certainly I have no interest in coercing anyone who has ethical opposition to eating animal foods. But if you're wondering about what might be the most therapeutic diet for someone who struggles with depression, hypothyroidism, autoimmunity, brain fog, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, these kinds of symptoms, this is it. And I can almost guarantee you that you will see a change in 30 days. So I do actually believe there are specific elements to the red meat component that are very integral to this approach. So it's also poultry, eggs, including the yolks.
I love eggs.
Starchy vegetables like sweet potato, plantains, taro. Those are called resistant starches that feed beneficial bacteria. Nuts and seeds, and then of course cruciferous vegetables and pretty much all other vegetables, but with a focus on broccoli, cauliflower, that sort of thing. There's a lot of natural fats, like I said, so it's coconut oil, clarified butter called ghee, and then other vegetarian sources like avocado and olive oil. This is what you're focusing on. So you can use natural salt liberally.
Right.
It ends up being delicious. I mean, this is food that makes you feel full. You should actually rediscover simple, almost healthfully neutral relationship to food, where you're taking out so many addictive foods that you actually just eat when you're hungry and you're done eating and you move on with your day and you enjoy the experience. That was not how I used to eat. All I ate was addictive foods, and all I thought about was when was I going to get my next hit all day long, right? So what we are taking out is a lot of these foods that can push and pull on your immune system, pull literally on your brain. So we're learning that wheat and dairy, the proteins in them actually have brain level effects at what are called the opiate receptors. So not only do we understand now why they're addictive, but we understand actually, how and why they can generate behavioral and mood symptoms. So I ask patients to take out all grains, even though long-term all of my patients eat gluten-free grains. I do too. But for the month, again, to move the needle dramatically and to teach yourself what is possible through nutrition, I think it's important. So we take that out. We take out all dairy. That's a tough one. That was a very hard one for me because it's such an addictive food, particularly cheese. We're taking out all dairy.
That's a little hard.
It's very hard. I know. I empathize. But it's worth it. Especially if you have any digestive... literally, I went probably 30 years of my life thinking that it was normal for a woman to poop once a week. This is what women have no idea what healthy digestion is. So especially if you have any issues around that, this is a total life-altering change to make. So we're also taking out legumes, which is like beans, peanuts, and soy. For most people, that's not terribly difficult. But then we're taking out sugar, coffee, and alcohol. That's obviously very tough.
That's a little tough.
I know.
What about, and tea? I think even you took tea out.
Really minimize it, mostly because it has diuretic effects and because hydration actually is a really, really big part of brain function and digestion. So for me, if I am drinking tea, I'm not drinking water.
True.
So, to be able to hydrate sufficiently for optimal neural transmission and detox and digestion, it's probably best just to focus on filtered water for the month. So that's really the call to action.
The menus were great.
It's right.
They were great. It's not some restrictive thing.
No, it's not a 30-day juice cleanse.
Right. We, for the most part, eat like that at home. Obviously, we have things on that list that have to come out of there, but it's not...
Not necessarily. So listen, not everyone has an issue with cow dairy, for example. Certainly not goat and sheep dairy either. So this is a therapeutic intervention, and it's really meant to be an opportunity to biohack, right? It's an opportunity to teach yourself about your relationship to diet. It's, again, 1 month of your life give yourself that opportunity, because unless you are really dedicated to it, you're never going to be able to connect the dots. And you're always going to be wondering, like, what the hell should I be eating? It's like so many people are struggling in this limbo, and there's actually a really simple way to clarify it.
But even, I mean, it's just such a gift to self if you're struggling in any way. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be struggling with an illness. It
That's
could be
right.
struggling with stress, struggling with apathy, struggling with lack of passion, struggling with just feeling like I'm in the grind, the
Totally.
daily grind, and I just want to reboot.
It's resiliency. It's offering yourself resiliency. So when I, began to learn about some of the concerns of antidepressants, I began taking patients off antidepressants. And when I didn't lead with diet first, I was running like an outpatient rehab. It was a horrible experience for patients and for me. When I began first with diet, and I didn't touch prescriptions in terms of tapering them until we had a month or two of dietary change under our belts, it's a completely different game. So what does that mean? It means that you can actually confer a degree of resiliency. So resiliency it means you can handle anything. It means everything's gonna be fine. Whatever comes your way, you've got it. That's what resiliency is. And you're offering that, to your body when you lead with nutrition. It's really that simple.
You have 2 young children.
I do.
2 little girls.
Amazing that we haven't heard them yet.
Yeah, no, they're so well behaved. So what is your vision for their world and their healthcare, and how do we get there?
That's a beautiful question. So, this work is obviously inspired and dedicated to them because I went through a very dark period where I looked around at how toxic this planet was, at how, corrupt our various systems from agricultural to, pharmaceutical to medical, et cetera, are. I felt really hopeless, and I felt like, how are we ever going to get back on track? Once you understand where we should be, and you see where we are, it can be very distressing. And then I sort of, I shifted my mindset because it's in your control to do that. And one day I chose to do that, and I actually feel inspired that we are at a very important time in history right now where there is a readiness and like a fertile soil for change, and not just like reverting back to where we've been,
right,
but actually moving somewhere that takes the best of what we've learned and the technology that does exist and integrates it into a higher consciousness around our connection to the environment and respecting this planet, understanding that what's good for me, what's good for you, and what's good for the planet are all the same thing.
Right.
Reconnecting to communities, understanding that it's not about
and that we
warring
are
and fighting.
We are connected, right? And the notion that your girls will ask questions as opposed to
just take what they're given.
Take what you're given.
Unfortunately, that can be dangerous, yeah.
That's a beautiful shift. If we can just shift that conversation in itself for our children, for them to give them their voices, which they clearly already have, let them keep them.
Yes.
But to have them ask questions, what's going on? What's going on inside me right now? Or why am I feeling this way? Or what can I do about it? Or what is it trying to tell me? Or in your words, what opportunity is it presenting?
Exactly. And to really be wary of the quick fix.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, I think I got through like one page of 400. This is a gift. This really is a gift. And you know what? I have to tell you, I'm so excited about how our paths just crossed like the day you released your grassroots movement. And I'm thankful to Jennifer Cass for sending me this email and saying, you've got to check this out. And she was so right, because I think that this message is going to go, and I don't care what mainstream media did last week. I think that you've got a very, very powerful message that's going to go very, very far. And I thank you for writing this. I thank you for sitting down with us, and just rock on.
Total pleasure. Thank you.
Rock on.
It's really been wonderful.
You're awesome.
Wonderful to talk. Thank you.